Okay, so we're drawing closer and closer to Easter, and I thought today we might talk about miracles. Because in the traditional Christian community, Easter is really the commemoration of one of the major miracles in the Bible, and some would say the major and greatest miracle in the Bible, which is, of course, the resurrection. And once again, we are going to turn to the work of Eric Butterworth, which is where we left off last week. Now, for those of you who might be a little new to Unity, Eric Butterworth was a Unity minister who had a congregation in New York City that was so big that they would meet on Sundays in Lincoln Center. And he was one of our most prolific authors. He wrote a book called Discover the Power Within You, which was on the New York Times best-selling list, and many, many other books. And Eric was probably single-handedly responsible for helping Unity to cross the bridge from the 19th century into the 20th century. And every generation needs someone just like Eric to help us to stay on top of what we're learning about ourselves and the world around us, because that's something that's constantly changing, isn't it? In fact, Eric once said that a religion, to be a contemporary influence, must be redefined for every generation in light of that day's thought. That's what Eric did, and that's the work that we all have to keep doing here. So when it comes to miracles, Eric might be what people today would consider to be a bit of a heretic. Back in 1993, he wrote a book called Spiritual Economics, which we've used here quite a bit. We used it for our 7-week fall series here a few years ago. And in chapter 2, here's what Eric had to say about miracles. Well-intentioned enthusiasts of new thought often echo the misleading cliche, expect a miracle. It's supposed to encourage one to expect more from life, which is good. However, it is walking right into a trap. So I say, against the grain of the majority of most contemporary teachings and teachers of truth, don't expect a miracle. If you center your consciousness in the expectations of miracles, you are playing with universal law, hoping for some magical abrogation of its inexorable activity. Wow. Now, of course, that causes some problems for us here because we've got a song that we all like pretty much. Remember that song, I'm Ready for a Miracle? What are we going to do? What are we going to do with it now?
Don't expect a miracle, don't expect a miracle, there ain't gonna be no miracles today.
We can rewrite it, right? Oh my gosh, I was talking to Ken last Sunday about the plan, because we did the song just last Sunday, and I said, boy, it's a good thing we're not doing that song next Sunday, because I'm talking about don't expect a miracle. And he just sat down and he riffed that off just right off the top of his head. I was rolling on the floor. Now we're going to keep the song, as you'll find out by the end of the talk. So don't worry about that. We need to reword it or reframe it in consciousness. For me, when Eric says don't expect a miracle, it's just his way of trying to put some meaning back into a word that's been steadily robbed of its meaning in our modern pop culture. It's his way of putting some meaning back into it, and it's his way of getting us to really think deeply about what we mean when we toss that word around. And boy, do we ever toss it around. Now here's the classic definition of miracle. Go to the dictionary, there's probably 3 different definitions. This one's at the top. An extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. Okay, we toss the word miracle around all the time. Do a Google search sometime for the word miracle, and you will be amazed at how many different things it's attached to, especially in marketing. These companies that attach the word miracle to products, it's incredible. I remember my first encounter with it was when Mom would pack my lunch. Miracle Whip on my bologna sandwich with the slice of lettuce and cheese, right? Good stuff. So there's Miracle Whip. And then what were some of the other things that we have here? There's Miracle Whip, there's Miracle Ear. What else do we have? Miracle Grow for your flowers. Chef Tony's Miracle Blade. You know that blade where you can take that sucker, you can abuse it, you can chop wood with it. It'll still slice your tomatoes wafer thin. What else do we have? Anything else? Miracle Blanket. Keep them coming until it ends. Oh my gosh. Miracle Soap. Oh, Nature's Miracle. Now, I'm here to tell you, if you have a pet at home, Nature's Miracle is good stuff. That stuff is a miracle. What else do we have? Actually, the miracle would be if you could figure out a way to keep the pet from doing what it does in the first place, so you wouldn't need Nature's Miracle. But, you know, anyway, just a few examples of these extraordinary products that demonstrate divine intervention, right? Or at least that's the message that Madison Avenue is trying to get across to us. I mean, all those things are miracles. And of course, then you have the news media, right? The news media, they toss the word miracle around in ways that probably aren't really appropriate, because in sports, oh my gosh, you have the miracle on ice. That's the most popular one. Remember that back in 1980, the Winter Olympics, when the U.S. hockey team had to beat the Soviet Union? The only way they could have done that was by divine intervention, right? You don't think a little talent and coaching had something to do with it? Every time there's a tornado and it misses a house, they say it was a miracle. Of course, the tornado goes on to flatten a school just down the street, but the house, that's a miracle. Then we had an amazing event back in January of 2009 that everyone was calling the miracle on the Hudson. Remember that one? A U.S. air flight takes off from LaGuardia, runs into a flock of birds, loses both engines, and glides to a landing in the Hudson River where everyone survived. Now, I'll be the first one to agree that that was an extraordinary event. But did it really require intervention, divine or otherwise? And if so, then what does that say about all those other cases where something goes wrong in a flight and there are no survivors? Sorry, no miracle for you. God was too busy with other things. What does it say about God when we use the word miracle like that? If God is all-powerful and benevolent, you would think there should be a miracle a lot more often than we claim. And if there is no miracle, then it means that God isn't very powerful, or maybe isn't very benevolent, or maybe picks and chooses who's deserving of a miracle and who isn't, and you get yourself into this double bind. That's what happens when you use the word miracle to mean divine intervention. You get into this double bind. If it means divine intervention, it's always going to seem arbitrary and capricious. And what we end up doing, maybe even without knowing it, we end up having to make excuses for God, which seems like an odd thing to me. There's something wrong with that. Human beings trying to come up for reasons to let God off the hook when there's a miracle on the Hudson, but the other plane crashed and there were no survivors. We seem to be limiting the unlimited. We're making something small that ought to be unlimited. There's something wrong with our categories when we use the word that way. The miracle on the Hudson, divine intervention, or the work of a highly skilled pilot who had specialized glider training, who didn't lose his cool under pressure. Not to mention the crew. When they call something like that a miracle in a supernatural intervention sense, it really detracts from the skill and the performance of the crew. Life, reality, had already given them everything they needed to do what they did, and we don't have to resort to supernatural causes to explain what happened. The Daily Word this morning really sums up one of the core messages in unity that we have already been given all of the power and everything that we need to make those things happen. God doesn't need to intervene in human affairs because God is the principle that's at the very core of life and who we are and what we do. You might recall another Eric Butterworth quote. This is the one that I used at the close of the talk last week that really captures this truth so beautifully. He says, "Dwell for a while on the idea of the universe as the allness we call God, realizing that everything within it, from the vast galaxies to the subatomic particles, is created in and of the universe. You may wonder about the vastness of the universe and peer at it through a telescope. However, you are not on the outside looking in, you are on the inside looking out. You are the universe at the point where you are. The allness of the universe. Nothing more needs to be added, but maybe something needs to be discovered that's already there, or something needs to be cultivated. All we have to do is wake up to the truth of our own being, claim the power, remember who we are, live from that truth." So, a miracle. It's not a supernatural God intervening in human affairs. A miracle is when a human being wakes up and discovers the power within and then uses it for good in the world, to benefit ourselves, to benefit others. But there's another aspect of miracles that we also need to look at here today, because if you look at the dictionary definition again, the second one that you're going to find up there is probably going to be this one. Extraordinary events which appear to violate the known laws of nature. Extraordinary, out of the mainstream, unexpected. Okay, let's talk about some extraordinary events. Things that are so unlikely as to defy the odds. Well, start with human life on this planet. Looking at the history of the universe, the presence of intelligent life was a very remote possibility. The odds seem to be stacked against us every step of the way. And I think of that song that Ken wrote called "A Miracle Every Day." Not only should we expect a miracle, but every single one of us is a living, breathing, walking miracle in the sense that it is an extraordinary, extraordinary thing. Life is an extraordinary thing, but it doesn't defy natural law. It's a manifestation of natural law. So here's how we might deal with this second definition of a miracle. And this is what Eric has to say about it. He says, "Events that we call miracles do not violate the laws of nature. They are all the result of the operation of natural laws, some of which we may not yet understand fully." That's what Eric was getting at. That's the other part of the puzzle. If we say expect a miracle with the idea that it involves divine intervention or violates natural law, we're going to be out of alignment with principle. After Eric says don't expect a miracle, he goes on to say that a miracle is the natural fulfillment of divine law. All that is required is a steady and disciplined effort to study that law and apply it. So it becomes personal. It becomes something that we have to take responsibility for. A big part of the kind of discipline and study that Eric talks about is in discovering our personal and collective mission and purpose in the world. That's why we, again, remind ourselves each week of our mission and purpose here. And we also have a personal mission and purpose that we need to work on. What is it that we're being called upon to do and be in the world? What is mine to do? What is ours to do? It takes work to get there. Then it takes even more effort to get on purpose and stay on purpose. It's a daily thing. But if we do that, that's when things that seem to be miraculous can happen. Back to Captain Sully Sullenberger, who was the pilot of that jet that landed in the Hudson. He discovered his passion in life, his personal mission and purpose, which was flying for the love and the joy of flying. He didn't fly just to collect a paycheck. I've heard him described as a pilot's pilot. He loved flying. He studied it, he taught it, He lived it. He didn't just fly jets, but one of the things that he did, as I referred to before, was he learned how to fly gliders, which gave him a little extra special talent that maybe not every single pilot out there has. So that means that he engaged in the full reality of flying. Not just the good stuff, but also practicing for the bad stuff that can happen. He lived in right relationship to reality, which means that he embraced the whole catastrophe, as I've heard someone once say. He embraced all of reality. Let me ask you this. Would you like to fly with a pilot who decided that he or she didn't want to study up on emergency procedures because they didn't want to focus on the negative? Oh, that's too negative. I don't want to focus on the negative, huh? Just let me fly and God will take care of the rest. No, I don't want to focus on the negative. You know, not me. If we ignore reality, it will come back to bite us, guaranteed. If we fight reality, if we oppose reality, who was it? Byron Katie, who said, if I oppose reality, I'll lose, but only 100% of the time, right? Yeah. So that brings us back now to the final, and I think the best definition of miracle that I've found. And